Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming to our panel. I will be sharing with you some of the preliminary dissertation research I'm doing on microcredit and indigenous Filipino women. So to start, I'd like to tell you about a locked storeroom in the offices of one of the Philippine NGOs that provide microcredit services to poor Filipino women. In this room are stored things women have brought to the NGOs as partial loan payments and things that the NGO staffers will then try to sell. The room contains clothes, tin plates and eating utensils, pieces of plywood stripped from the walls of someone's house. In the corner of the room is a duyan, a woven baby basket, which staffers could not quite bring themselves to sell. In the Philippines and in other countries interpolated as developing, microcredit has emerged as the go-to and even the feminist solution for addressing poverty among women. However, these profits, these reports of amazing profits, and 99% loan repayment rates obscure narratives of loss, narratives that can be seen from the suicides of mothers drowning in debt, from the stories told by things left behind in locked storerooms. While proponents of microcredit have presented these as the exceptions, these narratives of loss comprise what Nefertiti Tadjar frames as the submerged historical experiences that tend to fall away from nation-state narratives of development. These fall-away experiences are rendered invisible by a development discourse that is heavily steeped in the success stories of exceptional subalterns. These are the small minority of women who are able to mobilize their microloans into profitable businesses. It is these experiences that are universalized, and the small number of successful micro-entrepreneurs become the exalted citizens against whom all others are measured. So the story of Milagros Dorado is typical of these exceptional subaltern narratives. Hers is among the success stories prominently featured on the website of the Philippine Micro Enterprise Foundation, or Pinoyme for short. Pinoyme was founded by former President Corazon Aquino, in the middle in yellow, and its board of trustees is composed of political and business leaders. It promotes itself as a social investment banker. It has strong ties to Philippine political and economic elites, and it bills itself as the new people's power, engaged in a revolution against poverty. Their 2009 annual report touts the tremendous success of the women and some men who were the early beneficiaries of Pinoyme's campaign to fight poverty with capital. So Pinoyme introduces Milagros Dorado as a micro-entrepreneur. Let's see. A micro-entrepreneur who used a loan of 7,000 pesos, so that's roughly $160, to open a duck-raising venture. She has since diversified to selling processed coconut byproducts, raising pigs, and cultivating rice to earn an annual profit of 740,000 pesos, so that's about $17,000. The narrative starts with this quote from Dorado. When we moved to Davao to escape violence in Cotabato, we knew no one and we had nothing, but I knew how to raise ducks. So of all the success stories in Pinoyme's annual report, Dorado's comes closest to acknowledging the institutional factors behind poverty among rural subaltern Filipino women. However, the story quickly moves away from this into how Dorado capitalized on her knowledge of duck raising. It briefly mentions but never elaborates on the violence that led to her family's displacement. Now, this allusion to violence in Cotabato is really, really important because Cotabato is one of the most militarized provinces in the Philippines. The Philippine Army maintains a significant presence in this region. Under the Balikatan program, which is a joint military training agreement between the United States and the Philippine governments, there is a significant presence, a large and unofficial significant presence of U.S. military troops in the area, supposedly to quell the suspected network of Muslim groups that are recruiting for Al-Qaeda. The Philippine Army is also deployed to protect the vast dole plantations and to drive indigenous populations away from their ancestral lands that have been rezoned into priority mining projects. And all these militarization projects financed with public funds. So it is this violence that displaced Dorado's family, that rendered this family as having nothing. Her reference to to knowledge in raising ducks implies that she had previously worked in this industry. And the fact that she's an early beneficiary of Pinoy's micro-lending program, that she possessed enough social capital to secure a loan on her own, for example, indicates that she already had previous entrepreneurial training. But all these salient parts of Dorado's narrative, including and especially the violence that drove her family away from Isulan, Cotabato, her own hometown, all these violences are removed from this microcredit miracle. Right. So thus, though she's probably not among the rural subalterns who are deemed uncreditworthy by organizations that are following the Grameen model, Dorado's narrative is strategically deployed to further acculturate women into the structures of finance capital. It's a form of training that Gayatri Spivak sees as the induction of subaltern women into a business culture that subsumes all forms of difference. The idea that anyone, even vulnerable women who are treated by the state with neglect and violence, can have recourse to justice through the social investment initiatives of a cosmopolitan elite. Yeah, this idea is either normalized or legitimized. And now, in addition to shouldering the violence of globalization, women also shoulder the blame if they're unable to lift their families from poverty. So microcredit, therefore, mobilizes women from the limited and limiting capitalist scripts of entrepreneurship, self-reliance, flexibility, competitive individualism. In other words, these are scripts geared towards the extraction of surplus value. However, there have been very strong critiques and resistance to these capitalist scripts, most notably from indigenous Filipino women. The Asian Indigenous Women's Network, for example, is an umbrella organization of indigenous women's groups in Southeast Asia that are organizing against what they term development aggression. This is a significant reframing of microcredit and similar initiatives in ways that foreground and make legible the dispossession and loss that development strategies engender in indigenous communities. I'd like to quote from an article written by Bernie Yokogandiano, who is chair of the women's group in Nabuyog, on how development aggression imposes greater violence against indigenous women. So in this quote, she points to how indigenous women are displaced from their roles in sustainable agricultural production. She speaks of displacement from their roles as traditional or as holders of traditional and indigenous knowledge, including medicine. And she talks of how development aggression disintegrates indigenous socio-political systems that underlie community support and community formation and protect women and children from violence. So this quote directly refers to the fallaway experiences of globalization as seen in the violence development aggression wreaks on indigenous women in the Cordilleras, which is in the northern part of the Philippines. These fallaway experiences include not only spatial and economic displacements, but also displacements from their roles as knowledge producers in their communities. The member groups of the AIWM do not oppose development. They oppose development aggression. And in its place, they are proposing development based on their episteme of Inabuyo, which roughly translates to not monopolizing the good. They are articulating development discourses built around the practices of Ubo, Aluyon, Binadan. And to give specific examples, some of the anti-poverty strategies they have proposed include comprehensive agrarian reform, the shutting down of foreign-owned mining corporations, so basically programs which are the antithesis of neoliberal strategies such as microcredit. So I'm not arguing that microcredit and similar interventions have not had any positive results, because they have for women like Milagros Dorado. But these successes are universalized, and these exceptional subaltern narratives are then made to stand in for the experiences of all third world women. For proponents of neoliberal interventions, the focus is not on learning the language of the other, but in incorporating the disenfranchised others into a language that is already legible, probably the only language that is legible to industrial elites based in Manila and to international donor capitalists. This is a technique that facilitates the entry of capitalism under the guise of philanthropy and good government. Excuse me. And moreover, it's an effective technique of distraction. The rebranding of capitalism as a benefactor or a benevolent supervisor in development discourse successfully shifts attention away from the reasons behind the dire poverty of marginalized populations in the Philippines. These factors include the confiscation of subsistence agricultural and ancestral lands, the privatization of social services, and the aggressive, even predatory marketing of development initiatives such as microcredit. These are, after all, important factors in the creation of subaltern subjects in indigenous and rural populations, and displacing people like Milagros Dorado from the farms in Cotabato. So to conclude, I am arguing that neoliberal development discourse undergirds restrictive forms of economic citizenship that commodify Filipino women into the flows of global capital. This form of co-optation and management of Filipina subaltern labor not only contributes to, but is actively constitutive of capitalism in post-colonial countries like the Philippines. Beyond the miracle success stories tied to neoliberal development discourse, it is vital to examine the devalued experiences that emerge from narratives of development aggression, from the desperation of mothers driven to suicide, from the stories told in locked rooms that house plywood walls and tin plates and empty baby baskets. I am arguing for the need and the possibilities of imagining development outside of Western developmentalist and state-centered terms, of imagining development based on sharing the good. Maraming salamat. Thank you.